Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you could take your seats, we'll be starting in 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to resume our meeting. Welcome to the afternoon of Tuesday. So I would ask you to take your seats, please. At this stage, I would normally ask for a readout from the conveners of the group that met at lunchtime, but I don't see either of the conveners in the room. So I will just hold that report out until a suitable time when they are available to provide a readout. In the meantime, delegations will recall that we were working our way through the agenda item 4D on any other issues, and particularly on the issue of very short-lived substances. We had two interventions, one from the EU and one from Canada, and we had one pending from the delegation of Cuba. So I would like to open the floor for Cuba to make its intervention on very short-lived substances. Cuba, you have the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We had asked for the floor before the end of the meeting in order to add that we had sent a draft CRP to the Secretariat, and it seemed we would like to see it activated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cuba. If that's the case, I'm sure the Secretariat is processing the CRP and it will be available shortly on the portal. So in that case, I would like to ask the room if there are any other delegations wishing to take the floor on the issue of very short-lived substances. I do not see any other delegations wishing to take the floor. So I will propose a way forward, which will be to thank the delegations very much from the EU and Canada in relation to their observations on the importance of very short-lived substances. And I propose to close this agenda item, noting that this issue will be addressed by the quadrennial reports next year. I do note that there may be interest in some delegations in submitting more information on very short-lived substances or alternatives to very short-lived substances, and I would encourage delegations to make those available to the Ozone Secretariat, and the compendium can be updated. The Secretariat's also just pointed out that there was a notification on the OEWG47 app about the availability of the compendium for those delegations that were not readily able to find it beforehand. So my proposal is that we close this agenda item at this meeting. and that it be revisited if necessary in relation to the quadrennial reports next year. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a general comment on the progress report of the technical team of 2025.
A very particular agenda at the moment, and I just wanted to know what your point that you wanted to make was.
I just wanted to flag something, just a general comment on the TEEP report 2025. I just wanted to give a general comment on the report.
So that opportunity was available when we were doing the adoption of the agenda to raise general issues. So perhaps if the room could allow a very brief comment, we can allow that. Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Briefly, please.
شكرا.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would like to thank the TEEP for its ongoing and concrete efforts to prepare reports. In this context, we would like to underscore the reference made in the 33rd of the MOP and the 34th of the working group that the TEEP report of 2025 as well as the 2024 report did not contain any alternatives that meet the aspirations of the high temperature countries. This poses a challenge for such countries to meet its obligations according to the Montreal Protocol. The high ambient temperature countries are facing specific challenges in adopting alternatives that are high energy efficient and that are safe to deal with the high temperatures, while committing to the international standards on designs and safety requirements in a manner that will not impose non-practical solutions on the maintenance and servicing requirements. The Secretariat must address these shortcomings in the upcoming reports, particularly given the situations of the high ambient temperature countries, in order to implement Montreal protocols in a comprehensive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia. I am sure that the TEEP has taken good note of your comment. I don't see any objection, coming back to the issue of very short-lived substances, I don't see any objection to the way forward that I had proposed. So that issue is now closed. Thank you very much, delegations. We now turn to the issue of PFAS, which was another issue added to the agenda. As indicated in the presentation made by the TEEP yesterday, Chapter 7 of its progress report provides updated policy relevant information related to PFAS and outlines the potential implications of transitioning to alternatives from controlled substances in various sectors. During the adoption of the agenda for this meeting, parties agreed to include this issue under agenda item 4D. And I would like to turn to the EU, who proposed this agenda item for us to consider. EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Yes, we raised this issue because we wanted to provide some clarifications on the way the issue of PFAS is addressed in the TEEP and the TOC reports, in particular with reference to EU legislation or any upcoming legislation in the EU on PFAS. First, we'd like to reiterate that of course, we fully agree that each country can choose the alternatives it considers most appropriate for replacing HFCs in their phase-down schedule. However, we observe growing concerns in many regions in the world regarding the link between PFAS and certain alternatives to controlled substances and their long persistence in the environment. increasing amounts of PFAS is now subject to a broader public and scientific debate regarding their persistence, accumulation, and potential harmful effects. As an example, water authorities have observed rising concentrations of persistent substances like TFA and expressed concern because these substances are difficult to remove with conventional treatment methods and may pose long-term risks to water quality. TFA, the main background product of many HFCs and HFOs, is a matter of concern. Currently, consultations are ongoing at the European Chemical Agency to classify TFA as toxic to reproduction as well as persistent, mobile, and toxic, and possibly very persistent and very mobile. TFA has been found in numerous studies in drinking water, other beverages, and foodstuffs in rising concentrations, and therefore directly consumed by citizens. The environmental and health risks of PFAS are also linked to increasing societal and economic costs. In the EU, the precautionary principle is a basis for environmental legislation and it requires us to act. As shown also by the TIAP report, regulation of PFAS is considered in the EU and underway also in several other regions of the world, some of which apply similar PFAS definition as the EU, which is based on the OECD definition. Any new EU PFAS regulation that might be adopted aims to provide more clarity to industry. This is to address the uncertainty which is created by valid concerns over these persistent substances raised by research, as well as increasing awareness and perception of the public. A general ban on PFAS has been proposed in the EU, notably with a number of exemptions already built in. However, such regulation is not yet in place and will for sure not be an undifferentiated total ban. The science-based process foresees to consider the extensive input by stakeholders is fully underway on a technical scientific level. Any new PFAS legislation in the EU that involves broader restrictions will very likely be accompanied by exemptions for uses that are critical, those uses where alternatives currently do not exist. By way of example, an exemption is proposed for the aviation sector by the proposals made. And there will, in all likelihood, be transition periods for other applications included as required. So, a couple of final points that we wanted to clarify in the report as regards alternatives in the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. We do not share the view that heat pump growth, energy efficiency, or the HFC phase-down becomes very difficult because of any future PFAS regulation. In the EU, we will be reducing the HFCs to 5% or less than 5% of our 2015 baseline by 2030, and we adopted a complete HFC phase-out by 2050. In some new applications, fluorinated gases cannot be used anymore in the near to medium term, including in small air conditioners and heat pumps. This is possible as there are today many suitable alternatives available for most refrigeration and air conditioning sectors, and natural refrigerants provide excellent energy efficiency in heat pumps, air conditioning, and refrigeration equipment. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much for that statement and information. I only have one country on my list at this stage wishing to take the floor. If any other countries wish to provide an opinion on this issue, please hit the request button. So Norway, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And we would like to thank the TIP for providing us with updated information on emerging policies related to PFAS and how it can affect our work under the Montreal Protocol. We would like to share a couple of reflections on this specific chapter in the TIP progress report. So we note that the TIP mentioned that TFA is an atmospheric decomposition product of some Montreal Protocol controlled chemicals and their alternatives, and that several other sources like from pesticides, pharmaceutical, industrial chemicals, and other chemicals also decompose to TFA. But we think it could be also informative to mention to which extent the substances controlled under the Montreal Protocol and their alternatives contribute to the total amount of new TFA added into the environment. Another reflection regards a statement that we understand comes from the Environmental Effects Assessment Panel, mentioning that the EEAP concludes that the risks to humans for chronic exposure to TFA in surface water remains de minimis at current concentration of TFA. We acknowledge that the EEAP has put much effort in assessing several new scientific papers and data for presenting the state of knowledge regarding the issue of PFAS in their 2024-05 update assessment. And we believe that there will be an opportunity at the MOP perhaps to give some reflection to this report. However, such a statement taken out from its context could be interpreted in a misleading way and question on which basis the EEAP come to this conclusion. So notwithstanding the approach that the EEAP is choosing to elaborate their reports, we find that the approach that other scientific panels operating under the umbrella of UNEP have adopted for presenting their assessments is quite useful to understand the information presented and the level of certainty in the key findings. As an example, in the report assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, experts express the degree of confidence with which their statement is made, reflecting agreement in the scientific literature and the evidence available. So perhaps something similar could be useful, providing a comprehensive and balanced assessment of the state of knowledge in order to better inform our upcoming discussions. Also reflecting further on the statement of the EAP that the risk remains de minimis at current concentration of TFA, our concern is in the fact that TFA concentrations in the environment are expected to increase due to a growing use of substances that degrade into TFA. In this year, where we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Vienna Convention, we would like to stress out that adopting a precautionary approach has been key to the success of the Vienna Convention, enabling parties to take early action and minimize further harm to the ozone layer. Considering the challenge ahead of us, we believe it is key that parties to the Montreal Protocol come together and embrace once again a precautionary approach, ensuring the best way of addressing emerging challenges, including PFAS-related issues. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Norway, for those observations. I now have 3 countries on my list: Canada, followed by Switzerland, and Trinidad and Tobago. If any other countries wish to take the floor, I urge you to make your intentions known shortly. I turn to Canada.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Well, first of all, we want to welcome the information provided by the TIP in its 2025 progress report regarding the issue of PFAS. And, you know, we think that it's important for them to continue to monitor regulatory and industry developments in relation to these substances, given the impact that these developments may have on the phase out of substances that are controlled under the Montreal Protocol and their alternatives. We appreciate the clarifications provided by the EU and Norway regarding how regulatory developments in the EU have been perhaps sometimes not reflected in the way that they understand them in the report. At the same time, we think that the TIP is raising important issues for consideration. You know, I think that they're reflecting to a large extent some of the concerns that they've been seeing within the industry. The extent to which these concerns are justified or not is another issue, but I think, you know, these are concerns that are having an impact and that could have a greater impact in the future. So, you know, it's important for us to continue to be aware of them. in the previous agenda item, we were discussing how, the concerns with regards to the availability of 2BTP as a replacement for halon was driving the civil aviation industry to consider changing the date for the phase out of halon in cargo compartments in newly designed aircrafts. So just one sort of glaring example of how these developments can have an impact on the work that we're doing here. We note that in the report, we see that this is not necessarily just limited to the fire suppression sector. We see that in the foam sector, it's indicated that some companies have reported that they're delaying decisions regarding the selection of fluorinated alternatives because of concerns about, these alternatives might be limited as a result of proposed PFAS regulations. In the case of propellants and MDIs, one of the key alternatives that are being looked at, could be affected by PFAS regulatory developments. It's not at the moment, and maybe it won't, but I think it's still important for us to keep track of those. And then in the refrigeration, air conditioning sector, depending on the selected definition of PFAS, proposed restrictions on PFAS chemicals could include the majority of fluorinated refrigerants, including some HFOs and HCFOs, which are used as alternatives for many parties to phase out HCFCs and phase down HFCs. So in this context, we think that as we move forward, we're going to have to get a better handling and better understanding of this issue. We may want to ask the TEEP to perhaps identify, specific applications where we see perhaps some delays in transition as a result of those, and see, just as we're trying to do with halon 1301 at this meeting, see if there's any clarifications or anything that parties could be doing within this forum to ensure that while we continue to develop our regulatory approach of PFAS, it's done in a way that we can at the same time ensure the sustained phase out of ozone depleting substances and HFCs. So we don't have any specific ideas or proposals at this meeting, but we just wanted to flag that we continue to monitor this issue for future meetings, and it may be useful to consider if there's more specific work that the TEEP could undertake in this area, and for us to discuss at a later time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. I turn the floor to Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We would like to thank the assessment panels for taking up PFAS in their progress report. Definitely an important issue to be careful about. And we have a comment on the information referenced in the progress report, information that stems from the Environmental Effects Assessment Panel's update assessment from 2024. As it was already highlighted by a distinguished colleague from Norway, the Environmental Effects Assessment Panel concludes that the risk to humans from chronic exposures to TFA in surface waters remains de minimis at current concentrations. We would like to draw the attention of the parties to the fact that new information has been coming in on TFA, which might lead to a need to revisit this conclusion. For example, the European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, is currently reviewing a dossier concerning the classification of TFA as toxic to reproduction, category 1B, very persistent and very mobile, as also the EU has stressed in their intervention. Further, a new study has recently been made available online for public review on trifluoroacetate, TFA, in precipitation and surface waters in Switzerland. This study analyzes TFA concentrations in archived and recent samples of precipitation and surface water in Switzerland. It also discusses the relative importance of different TFA sources. One important result of the study was that TFA concentrations increased by a factor of 4 to 6 since the 1990s. With regard to such new information on potential health effects and temporal trends of TFA in the environment, we are looking forward to seeing updated information on these issues also in the quadrennial assessment report, so that parties can consider them for their deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. I have 3 parties on my list, and I would like to close the list after the end of the intervention from Trinidad and Tobago. The other 2 countries on my list are the United States and Kuwait. So Trinidad and Tobago, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We commend the TEEP and its Technical Options Committee for preparing the May 2025 progress report and for highlighting the complex intersection of fire suppression needs and emerging regulatory considerations on PFAS. We note with concern the report's findings regarding the reliance on HFC 227EA or FM200 as a major in-kind halon alternative in the fire suppression and as a classification as a PFAS under certain definitions. As the report indicates, this classification could significantly impact the viability of HFC 227EA and other fluorinated agents, particularly in critical sectors such as oil and gas and civil aviation. For Trinidad and Tobago, the oil and gas sector is an enduring user of fire suppression agents and relies on HFC 227EA for both inerting and extinguishment capabilities in enclosed environments. The uncertainty surrounding current and proposed PFAS regulations risk constraining the available alternatives to halons and HFCs, undermining the progress towards achieving the objectives of the Kigali Amendment. This is particularly critical given that, as the report highlights, there is no single perfect replacement for the Montreal Protocol controlled substances in fire suppression applications. We reiterate the need for further scientific assessments to clarify health and environmental impacts of PFAS substances, including the breakdown products of HFC 227EA and other fire suppression agents. We also reiterate the policy guidance to ensure regulatory developments on PFAS do not inadvertently restrict essential fire protection applications or delay the transition towards low global warming potential alternatives. Encouragement of innovation in developing PFAS-free fire suppression solutions that can meet the rigorous safety performance requirements of high-risk sectors such as the oil and gas. Trinidad and Tobago emphasizes the importance of a balanced approach that safeguards both environmental and human health while preserving fire safety, particularly in sectors critical to national economies. We encourage TEEP and the Fire Suppression Talk to continue monitoring these developments and provide parties with updated technical assessments on viable alternatives to HFC 227EA that are both PFAS-free and suitable for high-hazard environments. Finally, we thank the Ozone Secretariat for organizing this meeting, the government of Thailand as the host, and congratulate the co-chairs on their appointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trinidad and Tobago, for those views. So the list is now closed and it stands at the United States and Kuwait. US, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. We've been listening to this discussion with some interest. To be honest, we hadn't initially planned to intervene. We're a little bit uncertain as to what this body is doing right now. But I'll just share a couple of reflections. I think the first is we will urge the science panels to the Montreal Protocol to continue doing good science and only do good science, and to report that to this body. We have indeed seen for a number of years them providing reports, for example, talking about de minimis risk, and some countries now seem to be urging them to use a different approach or to apply non-scientific techniques to come to a different conclusion. If we're going to turn our science work into a political discussion, I guess we will simply note we weigh in on the other side of politicizing those scientific conclusions. And again, we'll just say, listen, we're the policy body. Let's just get the information from the panels who usefully inform us. I'll be honest, the panels we have here compared to a lot of the other science bodies we have in other fora, they're of much greater value here, and countries trust them because they just give us the science. We understand countries have different policy positions, and that's okay, but yeah, just getting a little bit concerned that we seem to be making political suggestions that they should be coming to different conclusions. That's not to say a conclusion this year is the same as a conclusion next year or 5 years from now. Indeed, if there's evolving science, we understand that will be looked at, but needs to be looked at on the basis of the scientific information, not because some countries in their own domestic processes are coming to different conclusions or approaching this in their own particular way. I would just note a couple of things. TFA is not a controlled substance under this protocol. I'd also note there's environmental implications both for a number of the controlled substances, but also for many of the alternatives. And so we're now having a pretty extensive discussion about one particular group of chemicals and really the regulatory actions being taken in one region. It's a much broader issue, and it's not just about long-term ecological or human health impacts. Some of the substances we're talking about have acute implications with respect to, if they're not properly used, being a threat directly to human health and safety. So I just want to say we've sort of gone down a very specific road here, but I think if this conversation is going to continue, it's going to need to be a much broader conversation that takes up other types of alternatives and really thinks them through, I think, in a more holistic sense. On this particular issue, I will not explain to you the entire US domestic regulatory approach. We have a much more targeted and specific and stepwise approach on PFAS, focused on where we see risk. I don't think the countries in this room need to really know what my regulatory approach is, because in the end, we're all deciding the technology path that we're gonna choose to move down as we implement obligations we have taken on, whether it is a phase out of HCFCs or a phase down of HFCs. And I think that's a bedrock principle here. I do and to be honest with you, for the most part, we actually think that's the most relevant point. I do understand there's some overlap here. Like the aviation issue, just to be honest, we've just talked about that separately. We'd prefer to keep that as a separate discussion here, but I would say to me, it's a fairly narrow lane here. So what has happened there, as we understand it from the airframe manufacturers and engine manufacturers, is that they have sent a letter in the ICAO forum expressing concerns about potential restrictions that are related to PFAS rules in one region. This becomes tricky because aircraft is a global issue, right? But the vast majority of what we talk about in this forum isn't related to these very limited global issues. It's actually the transition in our own refrigeration, air conditioning, solvents, foam blowing, the traditional sectors that we deal with. There is a separate issue of this, perhaps in some isolated cases, creating, I think in this case in aviation, like a response from the regulated industry about concerns about the uncertainty that this has created. And I think separately here we'll deal with that issue. But I think at the core, in the end, we will all choose our own path on how we're going to phase down HFCs. I think at the core, we should be technology neutral and not try to prescribe that to people or to worry people, create concerns based on one country's or some countries' application of precaution over the actual analysis of risk that is done to assess this particular class of chemicals, or for that matter, any class of chemicals for substances that are alternatives to the controlled substances that we deal with in this body. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States, for those observations. And lucky last, I turn to Q8.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and I don't think I'm that much lucky. Even the last word is why, which is my name. But I was listening carefully, and if you see the statement in that room regarding the PFAS was totally from Article 2. And the message is that Article 5 are not concerned with what you are putting now on the table that is not regulated under us. We are having so much burden to move even one step, baby steps, and you take us for things that you already generated for yourself. I don't know where is the EU at that time when we discussed Kigali and we are adapting to remove HFCs, supporting HFOs. Didn't they find that PFAS will be there? I'm not sure. Now they don't know that 32 is a PFAS. Are they manufacturing, banning 32 in their countries, or whenever they get from 404, all of these 410As, now they see that PFAS is dangerous. Okay. As the distinguished delegate from USA said that this is not a controlled substance, but if the scientific wish to do things, I think hydrocarbon is dangerous, safety dangerous on the human more than the environmental effect of PFAS on the sky to the people, on the water surface. Now we are pushing the people to go to the thing. In early 80s says that hydrocarbon 290 was dangerous on the health. Let's go use fluorinated gases. And now we are dealing with whatever you are throwing on our face as a technology, and then you say you cannot use it. So in this stage of the time, for the next 10 years, are we considering PFAS or considering the technology that we have to shift in? If that's the regime and if that's the call, I wish all of my colleagues from Article 5 postponed any movement in their KIPs, wait the report and the outcome of PFAS so we can choose a technology at that time. And we should not jump to a technology that after 3 years will be banned and we have to move it and take it out and then we cannot choose another alternative. And I think it's a chemical coal industry because even the hydrocarbon are not natural refrigerant in a way. It's called natural refrigerant, but chemically, scientifically, it's not a natural refrigerant. So we want to understand that the burden that we are putting, and some cases, the scientific TF says this one, and someone says that. I read a study says that you are not correct. So, okay, I have 10 studies says this is not an environmental issue. Then I think, in my point of view as a party from Article 5, that, sorry to say that, even the outcome of that report is not in my even smaller scope. We have smaller scope. Come to my country, the temperature was 53 yesterday, in the evening it was 47, and tell me that you are caring about PFAS or you are caring about having a cooling system for your grandmother or for your child, even to play in a place that is conservative. EU last 3 weeks have 40 degrees. And it was something in all the newspaper. I was laughing, and my place says, oh, come on, it's 53 in my home. I cannot take even a shower in the morning but because the water is hot. So let's be realistic. If you have an issue with the technology adoption, solve it between yourself. We are just a technology adapters. We are not technology inventor. Invent, finish, come to us. But don't dilute our market, don't dilute our economy, don't dilute our movement. Let's be realistic. I think the success of this Montreal Protocol was understanding each other's rather than competing between each other's. So sorry to say that I'm totally in line with the statement from the distinguished delegate from USA regarding the PFAS. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kuwait. You are lucky last, it's fine. So we've had a number of useful interventions, some clarifying, some with observations to share. I did not detect a proposed action that is to be taken by this body. I was going to propose a way forward, but I see that Saudi Arabia has requested the floor. If you are to agree with perhaps one of the delegations that's spoken, I perhaps keep it fairly brief. That would be my proposal.
شكرا سيدتي الرئيسة. ندعم حقيقة موقف دولة الكويت في.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. We firmly support Kuwait's position, which calls for holistic assessment. We ask the TEEP team to draft a global report when we come to impose constraints in terms of the use of PFAS. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Saudi Arabia. I think most delegations will be aware that this issue will be addressed in the quadrennial reports next year, and that the panels will keep us alerted to any issues that arise or to new scientific and technical information that would be relevant for the parties. So since there has been no specific action proposed during the course of this agenda item, I propose to close this agenda this sub-item and trust the report writers and the Secretariat to properly reflect the views expressed by the delegations in the report of the meeting. I don't see any objection to this way forward, so thank you very much, delegations. This item is now closed. Before I turn to my co-chair to address agenda item 5, I would like to just backtrack a little bit and perhaps ask either Alexandro or Leslie, who convened the informal meeting on TEEP organisation, to perhaps provide a readout to the meeting on that informal meeting, on your discussions. Who should I be read? You're both looking at each other. Please decide. Italy. Alessandro, you have the floor.
It's the same. Thank you very much, Madam Convener, and good afternoon. Yes, we had an interesting exchange of views with among parties and with the Secretariat and especially the TIP experts, including representative from TOX, co-chairs. And basically, the TIP provided response to many clarifications posed by parties, and I think we were able to have further clarification on the status of the proposal which is included in the document. We haven't reached any conclusion because Madam Co-Chair was an informal contact group, and the objective of this group for this time was to have questions and clarifications. And we hadn't any proposal as a possible way forward. And so we are in the hands of the plenary if parties might wish to have a further talk or any other way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Italy. Can I just ask either you or Granada whether you sense there is a need for your group to meet again for further clarifications, or whether you feel like the discussion was exhausted during your discussions today? Italy?
I got the feeling that that most of the responses address the questions posed. We hadn't any pending questions, so this will bring me to the conclusion that perhaps we might have finalized the discussion for the time being. But of course, that was just a preliminary talk, and maybe sometimes parties may wish or might need to have further internal thoughts or sharing with colleagues, and so we are really open, but in case myself and my co-chair would be of course available to organize another meeting if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Italy. Does any delegation feel the need for this informal group to have another meeting? Do they feel like their questions have been answered and they're satisfied with the information provided? Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I guess we hadn't understood that, the purpose of the informal meeting was only for questions and answers. We thought that once we had those questions and answers, perhaps there could be a discussion among interested parties in the group regarding whether and how we move forward with the options for configuration that the TEEP has proposed, as well as to listen to any other options that perhaps some members may want to propose. But I don't know if that's the understanding of other parties, but I think we would be ready to the extent possible to make a little bit more time available to start having an exchange of views among parties. Again, with the TEEP present, that probably would be helpful in case there are any more questions that are raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. So we'll keep this issue open for the moment, and perhaps if we find another space later in the week, we can come back to this issue and perhaps schedule a little bit more time for not just questions and answers, but also perhaps for discussions on the way forward. Is that agreeable to the group? I don't see any objection. And thank you very much to Alexandra and Leslie for making yourselves available today and potentially later in the week. So we will now turn to the next agenda item, and I will now turn to my co-chair. Chantal, over to you.
Thank you, Annie, and good afternoon, everyone. So I now invite parties to turn to agenda item 5 on feedstock uses of controlled substances. In decision 36.5 of MOP 36 last year, parties with production and or use of controlled substances for feedstock were invited to provide the Secretariat on a voluntary basis information on their established national procedures and frameworks for management of such production and use, including any controls on resulting emissions. The deadline for submission was 1st May 2025. In that same decision, the Secretariat was requested to prepare a compilation of the information provided by parties for consideration by OEWG47. The compilation is set out in document 47/3. We would like to thank the 5 parties, one on behalf of its 27 member states, that submitted responses. Now we will open the floor for interventions on this issue. The floor is open. I see that Saudi Arabia is requesting the floor. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدتي الرئيسة. حول استخدامات المواد الأولية.
Thank you, Co-Chair. On the use of feedstock uses of controlled substances, Saudi Arabia affirms that the emission of controlled substances are exonerated under the Montreal Protocol. We do not want to see any drafting which refers to this element. We insist upon the importance of the use of feedstock uses of controlled substances, in particular in the absence of alternatives. We have relatively low emissions of these. Also, Saudi Arabia commits to assessing alternatives which have the lowest environmental impact, which will contribute to achieving a balance between environmental protection, sustainability of the national industry, and ensuring sustainability and viability of the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. We note your intervention. I see EU and China on my list of speakers. I now give EU the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We noted in the TIA progress report that feedstock production and related emissions continue to increase annually. This applies in particular to carbon tetrachloride and HCFCs, but also to HFCs. This is closely related to the increased production of HCFC and HCFOs and HFOs. The annual increase can therefore be expected to grow even further into the future. So, we note also with concern, including from the information in previous reports, that emission factors tend to be significantly higher than previously assumed. As pointed out by the SAP in the Scientific Assessment of Ozone Depletion Report 2022, these emissions are relevant for the recovery of the ozone layer and for fighting climate change, so they may have a negative effect on both. In this context, we wish to note that the feedstock exemption was established by the parties under the condition that emissions from the processes where ODS are used as feedstock and other controlled substances will be insignificant. We note that 4 parties, including the EU and its 27 member states, have submitted information on feedstocks by the deadline. So we thank the others for submitting such information. We also hope that any other parties that produce feedstock will still provide any relevant information, given that a number of other countries have also reported on feedstock use in recent years. We would like to thank the Ozone Secretariat for making a general summary of the submissions. Our submission was more detailed than what was presented in the overview summary. Besides information on legislation and best available technology, our submission also provided new data on emissions of feedstocks and emission factors as further input to future work of TIAP and for the information of other parties. We would like to ask the Secretariat to publish also this detailed information, unless we just haven't found it on the web. This may be the case, as we know from a previous agenda point, as additional information for this meeting, so that others can also examine this information. We would also be very interested to hear if other parties have submitted, or what they have submitted in more detail. Possibly others will also agree that their detailed submissions are provided. It is clear from previous information provided by TIAP that emissions are not only limited to production or use. Activities such as transportation, distribution, storage, handling, and repackaging can also have significant emissions, and we need to take a closer look also at them. For any work by TIAP on this issue in the future, it may also be important that parties provide more information on emissions from these processes, given the relevance of feedstock use. It is very important that we exchange further on the best practices, on legislation, on controls, and other means to avoid emissions for these activities in the light of rising emissions at a global level. For instance, from the discussion yesterday with the TIAP, I also heard them say that there's certain data gaps and more information is needed, such as local site monitoring and regional modeling to help them identify better what the emissions from feedstocks are. So with these issues in mind, we are working on a CRP. We have started to do some outreach. We will do some more of that and hope to complete the CRP soon for submission to the portal. So for this reason, we would like to discuss these, the submissions made and the upcoming CRP in a contact group and ask the Ozone Secretariat to provide a room for this purpose. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, EU. I note you indicated that you are intending to prepare a draft CRP. So we would encourage you to complete it as soon as possible so that it can be presented to parties so they can hear fully your thoughts, and then we can decide on a way forward in terms of how that should be addressed. I now see China and Australia on my list. China, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First, we thank the Ozone Secretariat for compiling and summarizing information under Decision 36/5 on the practices, technologies, and national management procedures submitted by the parties, and provides valuable reference for parties seeking to strengthen the management of feedstock uses of controlled substances. We believe that a discussion on strengthening the management of emissions of controlled substances for feedstock is possible. However, during the discussion, we need to take into account fully the three aspects I'm listing now. First, the production and use of controlled substances for feedstock is driven by the needs of downstream manufacturing and is evolving with market demand. Therefore, discussions by parties should be grounded in market realities. Second, feedstock uses of controlled substances cross-cut multiple steps in many sectors. Their processing methods and emission processes quite many, meaning that emissions have complex factors with many challenges in management. Third, technical and management capacities vary across parties. We believe that discussion on this issue should remain within the scope set out under the protocol, while fully taking into account the specific circumstances and challenges faced by parties. Thank you.
Thank you, China. And I will give the floor to Australia. You have the floor, Australia.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Australia would also like to thank the Secretariat for its summary on the national frameworks in the four jurisdictions that are in place to manage feedstock uses. As a country with only intermittent feedstock uses, we found it useful to review this information to inform our own framework for feedstock controls. We note the summary provided by the Secretariat is quite high level, and if the countries making submissions were agreeable to having their submissions placed on the Ozone Secretariat website, we would find it useful to look at the further detail. We also note that one country intended to submit information but did not do so before the deadline. If this country and any others were minded to submit late information, we would also support it being included on the website. We note also the brief update from the TIP on feedstock uses, and it includes information on feedstock uses for the HFC feedstock uses for the first time. We assume that as time goes on, data on HFC feedstock uses will continue to become more comprehensive. We look forward to more comprehensive updates in the 2026 updates from the TIP and the SAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. I now have on the list Switzerland and Norway. I encourage other parties who may wish to intervene on this matter to please indicate. So I give the floor to Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We would also first like to thank the parties who submitted information in response to decision 36/5. And maybe first a quick direct response to the delegate to Australia. The party that did not meet the deadline was Switzerland, so we meanwhile submitted information, and the Ozone Secretariat was so kind to upload an updated document which is available, so parties might want to take a look at that. So also with this, a great thanks to the Secretariat and their efforts to even deal with latecomers. Having said that, we would like to highlight that even if we are now a bit better off with the information from parties, we are facing quite a disturbing new realization, as highlighted in the TEEP Progress Report 2024. Feedstock emissions are not insignificant, with about 0.5% of the material used, as assumed during the last decades of operation of the Montreal Protocol, but that the emission factor is rather around 3.5 of the feedstock. And it is even not unlikely to be up to 6% in individual cases. In addition, feedstock use is expected to rise in response to higher demand of the resulting end products. This will undermine the efforts undertaken under the Montreal Protocol by delaying the recovery of the ozone layer. In fact, we were made aware that a scientific paper will shortly be submitted to a high-impact journal in which the effect of feedstock emissions on the recovery of the ozone layer will be forecasted. And from our current understanding, this forecast indicates a substantial delay in the recovery of the ozone layer if no additional measures are taken to reduce feedstock emissions. In this context, we would like to encourage parties to continue their conversations on the challenges posed by feedstock and strive to find solutions to further reduce feedstock emissions for facilities where the technical ideal has not yet been reached. In this meaning, I also thank the distinguished delegate from the EU for suggesting a contact group, and we are very much interested in joining the conversation on the CRP. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Switzerland. I have only Norway on the list. Once again, it's a call for any delegations that wish to take the floor on this matter, so please indicate. And after Norway, if I see no other interventions, I will seek to propose a way forward. So Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We would like to reiterate our continued interest on this issue due to the large emissions associated to feedstock uses of controlled substances. We would like to thank the parties that have submitted information requested by decision 36/5, and also to the Secretariat for compiling this information. We find this information very useful and believe it is also useful to the TIP, but also to the parties that could be interested in learning from the different practices, technologies, and regulation for managing the use of controlled substances as feedstock. We think it could be useful at this meeting to have an exchange on this information provided, and we also heard that the EU is working on a draft CRP that we look forward to considering. We are also positive to make available any additional submission of information that might be sent to the Secretariat, and we'll be happy to participate in further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Norway. So I'm not seeing any other requests from the floor. So what I would propose to the meeting is that, given that the EU has indicated that they're working on a CRP, that we allow them the opportunity to complete the CRP and submit it, taking into account, I would encourage them to take into account the interventions of other parties made on the floor in the preparation and finalizing of the draft, and then you can present the draft to the meeting for further discussion, and we can decide on how we would move forward in terms of the group discussion. So that is the proposal from the floor. If there are no objections, that is how we will proceed. I'm not seeing any objections, so EU, we would encourage you to submit as soon as possible your CRP. So thank you delegates for that interesting and lively discussion, and I now hand over to my co-chair, Annie, for the next agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantel. I see the Secretariat has anticipated our next agenda item, which is on enhancing regional atmospheric monitoring of substances controlled by the Montreal Protocol. Under decision 36.1, taken last year, parties made a lot of requests, but it specifically requested the Ozone Secretariat, in consultation with the Advisory Committee of the Vienna Convention General Trust Fund, to organise activities for evaluating the sustainability of the suitability of potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances, and to report on progress and any outcomes of those activities to this meeting. Information on progress implementing this decision can be found in the Secretariat's note for this information and the addendum also to that note. So I would like to request the Secretariat and some members of the Advisory Committee to report on progress of the implementation of that specific part of decision 36.1. So I think we will have Sophia presenting first. Then we will have a video presentation by Professor Ravi, who is unfortunately not able to be here. But Dr. Steve Monska and Dr. Ken Jux are here to answer any specific questions. That's how I understand this session to proceed. So I turn over to Sophia to start the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As you know, decision 36/1 requested the Ozone Secretariat to report to this meeting and also later on to the 37th MOP this year on progress and any outcomes of activities related to evaluating the suitability of potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances, organized by in consultation with the Advisory Committee of the General Trust Fund for financing activities on research and systematic observations relevant to the Vienna Convention. And for brevity, we tend to refer to this fund as GTF. Now, in this presentation, and as the co-chair mentioned, Professor Ravi Sankara, one of the co-chairs of the Advisory Committee, and I, on behalf of the Ozone Secretariat, will summarize the progress made so far in the implementation of that decision. Unfortunately, Professor Ravi Sankara is not able to be with us, but he has kindly recorded his part of the presentation, which we will play after I finish my part. However, we are happy to have now Dr. Steve Bonska, who is a new Advisory Committee member, and Dr. Ken Jaggs, who is, of course, one of the sub-co-chairs and has been with the Advisory Committee in recent years, so that we can all address any comments you may have, any questions you may have. So, the note of the Secretariat and the addendum to that note provided information on progress made in implementing this decision by the time of the preparation of those documents, and the issues that were addressed in those documents were the membership of the Advisory Committee of the GTF, the terms of reference of the GTF, the terms of reference of the advisory committee, and also progress made in evaluating the suitability of potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances. Since the preparation of those documents, there has been some development on this issue, so I will briefly address the progress made so far on the three first points before I give the floor to Ravi to update us on the last point. So starting with the membership of the advisory committee first, in line with the MOP decision 36.1 and also the COP decision 13/2, which were adopted at the COP MOP last year, the Ozone Secretariat, in consultation with experts on atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances, drew up a list of 6 potential new members to join the committee and proposed that the expanded committee be chaired by 2 co-chairs. One to lead the part on work related to activities on ozone and UV radiation, and the other one to deal with activities related to atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances. So the suggested new structure and members were endorsed by, let's call it the original advisory committee at its 17th meeting, which took place on the 6th of March 2025. So now we have an expanded committee which consists of 16 members and is led by 2 co-chairs. And the current membership of this committee can be found on our website on this link, which is displayed on this slide. The first meeting of the expanded committee was held online on the 20th of June 2025, and of course they discussed several issues, but the key outcomes of those deliberations were that the committee endorsed the updates to its TOR. It agreed on how it will organize its work. It considered, of course, the status of the GTF and outstanding projects on ozone and UV, basically continuation of its previous work. It agreed on the deliverables to provide to the 37th MOP, and discussed also the key outcomes of the EU-funded pilot project entitled Regional Quantification of Emissions of Substances Controlled under the Montreal Protocol, and importantly, the linkages of those outcomes to the committee's work. And regarding the terms of reference for the GTF and its advisory committee, an analysis which was carried out by the Ozone Secretariat showed that an amendment to the TORs of the GTF is not necessary because they are broad enough to cover activities related to the monitoring of controlled substances. However, an amendment to the TORs of the advisory committee was found to be required in order to reflect fully the new structure and mandate of the committee. So subsequently, the Secretariat revised those TORs, and as I said before, those were endorsed by the expanded committee. So you can access these revised TORs on our website, which is through this link, which is provided on this slide. So so with this, now I turn over to Professor Ravi Shankara for his recorded presentation on the committee's progress in evaluating the suitability of sites, potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. First, let me start with my sincere apologies for not being able to be with you all in Bangkok. Some family medical issues came up and prevented me from attending the meeting. Many thanks to the Ozone Secretariat for providing me this opportunity to make this presentation via video. Also, many thanks to Steve Monska for taking on this task of answering your questions from the podium. He is very well versed with these issues. He, along with Sophia, will be able to answer any questions. So let me start off by asking a very simple question. Why do we need to monitor Montreal Protocol gases? The answer is quite simple. During the accountability phase, the parties may wish to know how the regional emissions of Montreal Protocol gases are changing to ensure the success of the protocol. By the accountability phase, what I mean is the phase we are in the Montreal Protocol, where some of the major decisions have been done, and now you want to ensure that your goals are being met, the goals you set in making those major decisions. And then with this goal in mind, what this presentation is about is to enable the parties to be aware of these emissions for your consideration. And what we're asked to do with this meeting is to first provide at the OEWG47, the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee was to provide a progress report, which I'm doing right now. And in the Montreal Protocol meeting at 37 in Nairobi in November, the Secretariat, with support from the Advisory Committee, will provide further updates, including on the identification of locations and sites. Let me just take a second here to make a very clear point. Regions are where the emissions would occur. Locations are the places where would be sensitive to those emissions. If you measure it in those locations, you can quantify emissions from those regions. And the sites are the specific locations you choose to make those measurements. Then the parties then could consider the information provided by this information and take decisions as you feel appropriate. Now, the GTF Advisory Committee was tasked to do the following at the MOP 37. One, identify and prepare a map of the possible monitoring locations and the regions from which the emissions could be measured. Then to identify and prepare a map of the potential sites for establishing the monitoring stations in those locations. And then to assist the Ozone Secretariat in updating its cost estimates on the options for it for long-term financing associated with enhancing atmospheric monitoring. And then to develop a list of scientific institutions, both at the national level and the international level, that we can work with, and those institutions that are working on atmospheric monitoring and related issues. That way, when we work with them, the committee should be able to ensure coordination, cooperation, synergies, and partnerships to make sure it is done as efficiently as possible. And then to start planning for the long-term work on calibration, validation of data, and sharing of data. Then, the GTF, the information gathered to date is what I'm going to provide as a representative of the Global Trust Fund Advisory Committee. The Advisory Committee work will benefit from the work carried out to date. Specifically, it includes the identification of locations for possible monitoring based on known controlled substance emission regions. Secondly, preliminary wind analyses to obtain the zeroth order indications of sites that could monitor emissions from regions of high emissions identified by this analysis. What I mean by zeroth order, these are not the final choices. You all make the final choices and determine where those sites would be set up. Third, preliminary observation system simulation experiments, commonly called OSSIs, for some of the locations identified by the wind and consumption analysis. Fourth, a study on the impact of the measurement frequencies in deriving emissions of controlled substances. This is a key question that comes up. How often do you need to measure? Where do you measure from? And what information would you be able to get? We thought we could actually answer some of these questions by doing a paper exercise, as I'll describe later. And then, what are the lessons learned from setting up a monitoring station on Bola Island? Items 3, 4, and 5 were generously funded by the EU pilot project. Then, turning to the potential locations for monitoring emissions, there are a few things to say. This is rather a busy slide, so let me go through this very carefully. What you see on the picture is the map of the world with the HFC consumption averages for 2011 to 2023. Now, all this information is provided on the website, the URL shown below here, the one you can see, this particular website. And this website shows not only for HCFC consumption, but also other gases such as HFCs, some of the CFC11, CFC12, and carbon 10. And what you see here is then those reported emissions from the countries distributed based on the population density and a few other factors that go in it. And the dots that you see are the suggested potential locations, and the circles, the outer circle, for example, here shows what's 1,000 kilometers from this location, and 500 kilometers is the inner circle. So there are 10 such locations we have identified based on the emissions of these gases. I would strongly urge you to look at this website for further information. Now, the central points, as I told you, are the potential monitoring sites, and the circles are the regions this site would be sensitive to. But this is based on a 50-meter observation site, about 50 meters above the ground. And the plot shows the likely regions with large future emissions of the Montreal Protocol gases. I really should emphasize that these things could change with time, because the emissions could change depending on what happens in the future. The locations of the monitoring site may and often does differ from the countries or countries of emissions. You can't necessarily monitor exactly where you're making, where the emissions are. You have to be removed from it by a few hundred to 1,000 kilometers. And then the plot shows the likely regions. The Ozone Secretariat is working on finding infrastructure at the locations close to these dots. And then the sites, again, I want to emphasize, will be chosen by you, the parties. And the OSSIs that has to be done to make sure that they work. And those OSSIs will be done when what you indicate. And of course, it might require multiple OSSIs depending on, for making sure the wind conditions or everything are represented correctly. Then, Now, turning to the EU-funded project, what did we find out from the EU-funded project? This has been roughly 5 years in the making. We started in 2020 with the white paper on monitoring the Montreal Protocol gases. And also there's a workshop associated with it before the work was summarized in the white paper. It was presented to the ORM in 2021, and ORM recommended that such Montreal Protocol gas monitoring be set up. A pilot project funded by European Union was initiated in 2022, and the Aussies were done for the Bola Island. This is the site that was chosen, and the Aussies were done by MIT without any cost. Then the measurements were done by sample collection by the University of Dhaka, by Professor Abdus Salam and his colleagues, and the samples were analyzed, chemically analyzed at the Bristol University by Dr. Anita Ganesan and her colleagues. And then this work is being summarized and reported, and it will be analyzed and will be available for the entire community. Just so that you know where this site is and what was done, what this map shows is the site. What you see here is the Indian subcontinent, the Bay of Bengal, and this is Bangladesh. And if you zoom in on Bangladesh, and if you look at it, this is the island, Bola Island, where this particular sampling location is located here. Okay, now, what does it take to make these measurements? First and foremost, you need to have a good location. This shows the infrastructure that is available in the Bola Island with the buildings, air conditioning, etc., and a small tower and access to these sites with a road, etc. And then you can see a closer picture of the tower and the building and the air conditioning that's in there. And then there's also have internet connectivity, etc. And then what you see here is a suitcase, that's what they call them, of 12 flasks that are in there that are shipped to the Bola Island to be opened at known specified times. And then those samples, when they're collected, is shipped from Bola Island to University of Bristol in United Kingdom, where a very sophisticated analytical instrument, gas chromatography followed with mass spectrometry, etc., and pre-concentration were done to quantify the measured concentrations. What was measured at this location during this project is shown on this slide. What you see here are all the list of Montreal Protocol gases and the associated, some related compounds. These compounds are really helpful in understanding the working of the atmosphere and also other issues related to sampling. For example, methyl brom iodide, what you see here is important to know because it was actually a near source in the Bay of Bengal, and the estuary is nearby. And so these are the list of gases that were measured, and these are the gases of interest to the Montreal Protocol. This is just a sample of the kind of information that you gather. What I'm showing here is the 2 years of measurement on the left here for HFC 134A, and this is on the right is the HCFC 22. It's a very complex picture and it's very cluttered, so let me just very briefly mention what these are. These gray areas are southern hemisphere background from Cape, from the Australian Tasmanian site. And then there's green dots that are here are from a clean air site, Mace Head in the northern hemisphere. Of course, you see a difference between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere because most of the emissions are in the northern hemisphere. And then the Bola Island sites are shown in this green plus marks. And what you see here is most of the time they are pretty much close to the sites that are natural background. And then if you look at these excursions, this is what is due to the sites measured in the Bola Island. And these excursions are then what is analyzed for understanding emissions that were detected in this particular region. Okay, so what I'm told you is a sample of these gases that were measured and what was detected at Bola Island. Now, what were some of the findings from Bola Island Observatory? These measurements were done for roughly 2 years, from February 2023 to May 2025, as you can see in the plot. The concentrations of most species are similar to those at remote locations. The second year closely resembles the first year, and it provides additional confidence in the data quality. The regional emissions are observed between November and February because the winds are such that you don't see much signal from the Indian subcontinent during other times because the winds are in the different from the direction. There were some measurement difficulties for CFCs. The causes are still being investigated. And this is another lesson we learned, is that it takes time to find interferences and difficulties and to fix them. The measurements showed that the species with co-located sources or co-emissions have high degree of correlation. This is what you would expect. And it's also a way of checking the quality of the data and having confidence in the quality of the data. Oceanic emissions, example methyl iodide, showed that the elevated levels in the vicinity of this site, because the site, the tower was not as high as we wanted, and also some local hydrocarbon emissions were detected. Ideally, as I said, a taller tower would avoid some of these issues in the future. Then the second thing that was done was asking the question, how often do we need to measure? And this was done as a paper exercise. The reason we could do this as a paper exercise is, first of all, we have a very long record of continuous measurements, that's every 2 years, from the Gosan station in South Korea, with a few little gaps. This is the data showing 134A. The background is shown in this orange. That's the growth in CFC 134A. And this blue are the excursions which brought in air enriched in 134A because the air was coming from regions with emissions of 134A. Then when you look at this as to where they're coming from, you could say that this is what is coming from Eastern China, extended Eastern China in this plot, and then from Japan and from South Korea. And then you can do an analysis of what these trends are. So first thing that was done is to pretend that instead of taking these almost continuous measurements, the samples were taken every day or every other day or weekly. Those are what is shown in these different colors you can see in these legends here. Okay, high frequency is shown in red, green is daily, blue is every other day, and weekly is shown in yellow. So this analysis was done by Dr. Alistair Manning and Luke Westrom from EU using the EU-funded project, and they used the UK Met Office model for doing these measurements. Now, what did we find from this? The second part of this is, if you were to look at this analysis from Eastern China, Eastern Extended China, Japan, and South Korea, look at the high frequency daily, every other day, and weekly samples, you see these trends. This is a very funny unit because this is emissions per year and how much it increased each year. So that's gigograms per year. It's a trend. So what you kind of conclude from these observations is, if you look at this table, is the uncertainties in the regional emissions trends are reduced with increased frequency. And it also appears that higher the frequency, better is the definition of the emission location within certain constraints. And also we saw similar conclusions for CFC 11 emissions in this study. Then the next thing that was done by Alistair Manning and Luke Western is to look at the sites that we identified earlier and showed you those 10 regions and do OSSEs for some possible locations. What I'm showing you here is the OSSEs done for the Vietnam site. And what you see here is what's called the footprint, and where this is the region where emissions could occur, and this site would be sensitive to seeing it. And it changes with season, as you can see, from different seasons because the wind direction changes. Such as this preliminary OSSEs have been carried out for 9 locations so far, for Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, Middle East, North Africa, Southern South America, in the northern part of South America, and South American Central region, Central Americas, Eastern Europe. OSSEs for the Central African region is pending. The OSSEs are a key preliminary step in positioning the measurement sites chosen by the parties in the location to capture the upwind emissions. Now, what are the major lessons we learned from Bola Island? First, it's imperative to have qualified and interested partners at the sampling locations. In this particular case, in the Bola Island, Professor Salam from the University of Dhaka was instrumental in making this happen, and along with analysis, chemical analysis by Dr. Ganesan in the University of Bristol. The sampling tower should be at least 30 meters above sea level. I mentioned this earlier. 50 meters is better. We really need to do 2 years of sampling to ensure reproducibility and check for intra-annual variability. And we need to take time to identify, diagnose, and fix problems. This actually is an interesting issue because you take a sample, ship it, and analyze it, and you won't find the problem until its analysis is done. Then you have to communicate and make sure the fixes are carried out. Excuse me. And then let me just kind of briefly end with the essential needs for a successful station. These are the messages from not only what is done with the pilot project, but also from the white paper and the workshop. Infrastructure is absolutely essential to have very good infrastructure at the site where you want to measure, including electricity, air conditioning, internet connectivity, roads, security, etc. I refer you to the white paper for looking at this. Logistical support for transport and receiving samples through customs and other regulations. Every country has different regulations. You have to be able to go through and navigate these custom regulations and local regulations, and have the capability to analyze these chemical samples. Unfortunately, right now, there are only a few facilities in the world that are capable of doing it, and they're pretty stressed because they're all doing such measurements. And I cannot emphasize this more. We have to have a common calibration standard to make the measurements and place them on a common footing. Right now, all the information you have heard so far over the last few decades is based on the A gauge and the NOAA network and the calibration standards they provide. And they also frequently intercompare their standards to make sure that's the case. So having a common calibration scale is essential. And carrying out RCs for the specific site before setting up a specific station is highly important, recommended, and it's important. And the data, once you get it, has to be shared with the scientific community so the community can examine it and tease out the information. And once a station and the associated personnel expertise is tested and found to be suitable after, say, let's 2 years, you can then determine if you want to set up a high-frequency measurement station at that particular site. This is the report from the advisory committee. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and thank you very much to Professor Ravi Shankara in his absence for a very comprehensive presentation. Just to note the potential to set up an informal group at the outset to have some further discussions on this issue, but I was wondering if there were any immediate questions that might be asked in relation to the presentation, which either Steve or Ken might be able to respond to. Are there any immediate questions or clarifications that delegations may have? I see Russian Federation has asked for the floor.
Спасибо, госпожа сопредседатель. Мы хотели бы выразить признательность за...
Thank you, Co-Chair. We'd like to express our thanks for this very interesting report. However, certain of our concerns have not been addressed. In particular, it was difficult on the map which was presented to understand where the dark circles on a dark green background were. It would be good if the 10 measurement sites could be named, so we can have names of the 10 countries in which they're located, so that we can very specifically locate them as well. Secondly, 2 years ago, we asked whether there are any plans to minimize infrastructure expenses. But here I think it was said very clearly that infrastructure is very important, and that's still the most costly element. Do you therefore plan to use the existing network, which has existed for a long time now, from the Global Atmospheric Watch, which belongs to the World Meteorological Organization? There you have everything you need in terms of infrastructure. We were told that indeed, yes, we will work with them, but in the report we didn't hear anything about this cooperation possibility. Do the stations need to be created from scratch, or can we use an existing network of stations? I think this is very important in order to optimize or streamline our expenditures. In addition, we should also take into account the fact that it's important that we have agreements in place with countries in which these stations are or will be established, and agreements with the authorities, competent authorities, tasked with atmospheric monitoring. As far as I know, sampling here and there will not really work. A successful foundation for this project will rest on cooperation and mutual trust between the parties concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation, for those questions, which I think are quite pertinent. Are there any other immediate questions that arise as a result of the presentation? Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And first of all, very grateful for Dr. Ravi Shankara's presentation, pre-recorded and long distance. We wish him well and his family as well. But it was really, really interesting, presentation. Just a couple of small questions, I guess. We noticed that already within the existing EU projects, 9 potential locations are being looked at. And I guess we're wondering like how this relates to the work that we sort of agreed to start last year, under Decision 36/1, where we approved, a budget of $400,000 to identify locations. So is this what's being done already with that EU project? Would that form sort of like the first part of this work, or is the idea to use the funding approved perhaps to identify another, 5 or 6 or more potential locations? So I guess we just want to know if these are sort of 2 different processes or if they're integrated within the same project in the end. Another one is we noted from the presentation that there's limited number of analytical facilities for chemical analysis of collected samples, and we're wondering whether you foresee that may be an impediment down the road if we start setting up more monitoring stations, and if this is also something that would be addressed within the projects, and the potential financial implications that it would mean also if we needed additional capacity for analyzing chemical samples. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. I don't see any other delegations wishing to take the floor immediately. EU, you have some questions. Perhaps after EU questions, I'll turn to the. I was going to say the panel, but you're not really the panel. To our experts to respond. EU.
Yes. Thank you. I assume that we will have also the opportunity to make some comments. Good, I see confirmation. No, we would have one question which perhaps links a bit to the last slide, a bit bringing a broader picture about how a good station can be established. Would you see a need to take additional action to support existing global monitor networks, so beyond what is currently discussed, the establishment of new stations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU, for a very brief question. So I turn now perhaps to the panel and or Sophia to answer those questions from the Russian Federation, Canada and the EU.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Let me start with addressing some of the questions by the distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation, because we recognize that it was very difficult to see where the locations were on this particular map. But the locations are mentioned already, actually in Addendum 1, but I can mention them now. They were in one location in the northeastern part of India, representing, let's say, the Southern Asia region. One was in what we call in Vietnam, representing the Southeastern Asia and the maritime region. One location was in Saudi Arabia, in Middle East, one in Mexico, North America, in Algeria, Northern Africa, Botswana, Southern Africa, Brazil, Central Southern or South America, the Russian Federation in Eastern Europe, and Ecuador in the North and South America. These were the locations, not the sites. So they were the locations where you could consider having a site so that it would sense the emissions from the wider region. So now, if one decides to set up a site, of course, we need to know what available infrastructure there is in the vicinity of these locations. So, and this is another deliverable that the advisory committee will have to look at. At least the Ozone Secretariat will have to help in this, and we are already liaising with WMO to try to find out whether we have any available infrastructure in the vicinity of these regions and other regions. So we need to be able to provide a map to the MOP later on. And of course, if one, as also Professor Ravi Shankara mentioned, if one decides to go for a certain site, to set up a site in a specific country, of course, you will need to have the permission of the country to set up such a site at its territory. I think, yeah, this is all I had to say about the questions of the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation. Perhaps I can say something about the 400,000 which Canada mentioned. So far, we haven't used this amount which was allocated for the Montreal Protocol Trust Fund balance, the 2025 balance. So the advisory committee was informed about the results of the pilot projects. Now it's up to the advisory committee to advise in its next meeting, which we'll try to have sometime around the end of August or beginning of September, on how we move forward and how they wish us to use this amount of money. For example, do we need to run more OCEs in other locations, or do we need to run different kind of dispersion models so that we have more robust for the same locations? So we really leave it up to the scientists in this advisory committee to advise, or perhaps there are some other areas of work that we need to spend this money for. So, but anyway, maybe Steve or Ken have some additional thoughts about this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sophia. I think next, perhaps, to address the question from the distinguished delegates from Canada and the EU regarding the capacity for chemical analysis of samples and how or if additional action is needed to support the existing observation capacity. Certainly the chemical analysis capacity worldwide is limited for analyzing, for example, flasks at this point in time, but I don't know that what's planned currently actually starts to exceed that capacity. I think the work associated with the EU pilot project enhanced our capacity for analyzing samples, in that now that capacity was developed in the University of Bristol, whereas before that project it didn't exist there. So I think that helps. The costs associated with that, I think hopefully the parties in the Ozone Secretariat have some experience related to that, given that pilot project and the addition of that capacity. So hopefully that is useful in that regard. I think when we think about the additional action, potential additional action needed to support the existing observing capacity, if the parties feel that that existing capacity is fragile or threatened, they may wish to consider adding redundancies in different places to increase the resilience of that measurement or analysis capacity. I think now that we have that ability in the UK at the University of Bristol and within the US at NOAA for flask analyses, that adds some further abilities and resilience within the worldwide community of of those types of measurements. And the other things to consider are things related to gravimetric scale preparation. Those activities are essential to underpin measurements. They are happening currently within the US, both at NOAA and within the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, so they're kind of in one place, although there's other places that could do it. Hopefully that addresses some of the questions for now.
And one last question or comment related to the question from the distinguished delegate from Russia about minimizing infrastructure costs and taking advantage of the GAW network. Many of these types of questions were addressed in the original white paper. We encourage you to look into that a lot. We are all very aware of the GAW network, which is really a confederation of many of the nationally funded efforts, and the WMO GAW network really helps to tie them all together. So we're all very aware of those activities and would definitely try to take advantage of that going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, experts and Secretariat, for answering those questions. I have just accidentally deleted my list of countries, but I do recall them being Kenya, the United States of America, and I see the Russian Federation wants to take the floor again. So we're just opening the floor for questions at this point. If you have any comments, we will come back to comments. So can I just turn to Kenya for your questions, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. Actually, my question is simple because I really want to understand if there is any coincidence or opportunity at one time to have the 3 or 4 different monitoring observatory measurement taking the same data from the same point, considering that you are told that one of it will be maybe 1,000 kilometers or from the other. So I would like to know if there is a time when they can take simultaneously the same data from the same point. If so, what analysis could we be given? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenya. I turn to the United States for your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. 2 questions we wanted to raise. The first one is if we could just ask on page 8 of the presentation where the map is, if our experts could shed a little bit of light. So one interesting part of the map that you've showed here, we understand this HCFC consumption. I mean, that's just a surrogate. There's the mapping here, obviously, there's many things you would want to think about, but it's sort of noteworthy that to the north of this site, and I think you said Vietnam, although, yeah, it's hard to see here. We have sort of a concentration in East Asia of sort of the highest level of emissions on the color chart here. So I was a bit curious that there's not a proposed monitoring station sort of in the midst of that. I mean, there's a reason for that. It could be because there's existing monitoring stations or something like that. But we would just appreciate a clarification on why that is. And then secondly, just with respect to point 3 on page 7 of the presentation, so one thing, we'll come to this in a bit, but we are just sort of trying to figure out with the different funding sources, what the sort of who's doing what and how are we piecing this together to achieve, I think, some of the goals that we want to. How did you say the Aussies were paid for? I understood perhaps you to say they're not paid for by the $400,000, but if you could just repeat that. And then finally, just to note, it's not a question, but just enormous appreciation for the presentation from Dr. Ravi Shankara. Appreciate Dr. Jux and Dr. Monska as well for answering questions here. But this presentation is incredibly helpful. We know a lot of work went into it, and also thanks to the Secretariat for their work engaging with and facilitating some of those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. I turn to the Russian Federation for its follow-up question, and then I'll turn to our experts.
Спасибо большое, госпожа сопредседатель. Спасибо.
Thank you, Chair. We wish to thank the experts who answered all of our questions. We had asked a very specific question, however, and we would like to have a specific answer. Will we be utilizing the existing infrastructure and more specifically the GA network, or will we be building stations without taking into account pre-existing infrastructure? As we said, we did not get an answer to that question. If you know already that these stations will not be used and that others will be created, if you have current knowledge about it, then you should tell us. Or you might also tell us that there are provisional agreements aiming to install additional equipment in these gold stations in order to strengthen the implementation of the protocol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation. I turn now to our experts, and Sophia first.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Apologies if I missed to respond directly to the question of the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation. The idea is that we use existing infrastructure as much as possible. So we are working with WMO on the GO program to find out where this existing infrastructure is. And perhaps with other networks, like, for example, network on long-range boundary monitoring, or, just to see where we have this existing infrastructure. And the idea is to give this information to the parties, to the MOP this year, so that they can consider this. Perhaps I can just say only, I can address one of the questions from the distinguished delegate from the US regarding who paid for this analysis. So basically, so far we have used we have used EU pilot project funds. So we paid for the measurement program on Ball Island, which ran for 2 years almost. And then because we had a few funds left, we decided to do these 2 analyses. Then we engaged Alistair Manning from the UK Met Office and Luke Western, University of Bristol, and then they did these 2 analyses. One was the subsampling study to find the impact of frequency, of measurement frequency on the results, on the results we would get. And the other one was this OSI analysis in 10 locations. I mean, we managed to do 9 so far. This study has not been finalized yet, but then we plan to have it by the time we go to the MOP, and then we will present these results. So all the funds that they were used for all these results that you have seen were coming from the EU pilot project, which is going to be finalized by the end of this year. The measurement on Ball Island has already finished. It finished in the end of June 2025. So the idea is now that these results will be considered by the advisory committee. They didn't have time to, in the first meeting that we had, to go in depth on this because we had to address so many issues and we had only 2 hours. But the idea is that we will have now a more focused meeting in a couple of months' time so that they can advise us how we can move forward on the issues, taking into account the requests of the parties in decision 36/1. Thank you.
Okay, yes, and to address the question from the distinguished delegate from Kenya, what I heard related to the benefits perhaps of having measurements from multiple groups within a similar region, and certainly that kind of activity is beneficial for a number of reasons. One, it can help with an understanding of whether or not those different measurement groups or activities are providing consistent information. That's one way to determine it, by looking at similar atmospheric parcels. And another benefit of doing that is to understand the concentration variability within a region for multiple different directions, so that one might be able to triangulate on the locations of different emission sources within that region. So those kind of things are quite useful, provided that one has the resources and capacity to have multiple sites within a region. And then to the USA's question about Eastern Asia, where the highest consumption region indicated on the map wasn't associated with a circle suggesting the addition of a measurement location. It's because this map doesn't show the existing measurement network. If it were to show the existing measurement network, it would show that the US, the EU, and also China, within those regions, there is a substantial measurement capacity currently that's ongoing. And I believe that's most likely the reason why there isn't circles in any of those regions on this map. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia and Steve, for those answers to the questions. If there are no more questions to the experts, don't move. I would like to close the list of parties asking questions because we have to move on. I see that there has been one last request for the floor. Can I just make sure there are no more questions from other delegations at this point? I don't see anybody else wishing to take the floor. So I'll turn to Iran for the last question, and then we will move forward with comments. Iran, you have the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I was wondering whether there is any calculation to see how much cost to set up one site, one station. If it is not that much, and also there is a possibility the fund to be shared by the host country, including infrastructures and buildings, whether there is any possibility to increase the number of the sites, which can increase our certainty on the study and also the measurements. This is the one proposal, and also I didn't see any site proposed in the Pacific Islands, in also Australia or in the Pacific Islands. Is there any reason for it? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iran. I could answer the question on Australia, but I might leave it to the experts. The cost of the sites, perhaps I could turn to Sophia or Steve for that information.
Thank you very much for those questions from the distinguished delegate from Iran. Costs to set up stations have been discussed in previous documents, and more information related to those will be presented at the next MOP. And so we're happy to provide more details of those offline should you need them, since I don't have them at my fingertips right here in front of me. And secondly, the way these circles and potential regions of interest were drawn on that map was a combination of gaps in the existing network plus the potential for significant emissions. And Australia, for example, is another region where there is existing measurements based on the A gauge site in southern Australia, in Tasmania, which covers a regional portion of, or captures a regional portion of southern Australia. And furthermore, so there's some existing capacity there. And furthermore, the Pacific Islands, given population and use of halocarbons, is probably pretty small, so that it would be less important or effective to place additional sites there to capture regional emissions, because they're likely to be small. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Iran nodding, so hopefully that has answered your questions. So thank you very much to Sophia, Steve, and Ken. We'd like to thank you. You're now excused from the podium. I'm sure you're very glad. While you're leaving the podium, I would just draw your attention to CRP4, which has been posted now, which is the CRP which was promised by the delegation from Cuba. So I draw your attention to that in case I just draw your attention to that CRP which has been posted. And we will close this session just a fraction early so we can get that CRP introduced into plenary. But now I'd like to turn to the discussion on this particular agenda item and ask delegations whether they have any comments or observations or points to make in relation to this very important agenda item. I see the EU has asked for the floor, along with Saudi Arabia, the UK. There's also been an observer, which I can't identify, but if we have time, we will come to an observer towards the end. EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. The EU would like to thank the Secretariat for the comprehensive report on the ongoing work. But foremost, we would also like to thank the members of the steering committee of this pilot project that we initiated a couple of years ago. So Ravi, which we heard, Ray Weiss, and until his retirement, Paul Newman, who invested lots of much work into steering the work undertaken. This thanks is also addressed to their respective institutions, namely NASA, the Scripps Institute, and NOAA. The University of Bristol and also other contributing institutions like the Michigan Institute for Technology and NOAA. So University of Bristol and University of Dhaka provided substantial contributions for the flask measurements carried out in Bangladesh. So our thanks to those persons and institutions. The pilot project has indeed become an international activity, underlining the global nature of atmospheric monitoring. In this vein, the initiative aims at supporting the globally operating networks, such as AGH and the NOAA Global Monitoring Laboratory Network. We are grateful to the US government and institutions for the leadership on this issue by providing infrastructure and expertise. The pilot project comes to an end this year. And in this context, we are glad that we are in the position to make a contribution of 4.5 million euro. That is about, at current rates, roughly 5.2 million US dollar, and to support the work of the General Trust Fund. For the tasks required in decision 36/1. As we heard in the presentation, we expect additional information by the MOB and for consideration at the MOB. For this reason, the EU does not intend to present a CRP at this stage. A decision should be considered on the basis of this additional information at the MOB. And it is also relevant, as it was mentioned before, to give the expanded advisory committee sufficient time to consider the issue further so that it can provide the scientific advice as required by decision 36/1. However, this decision established various working and funding streams which are meant to be complementary. And there we heard also a question and some doubt or some questions about how to ensure that complementarity. Therefore, we are happy to have the opportunity to discuss with interested parties during this MOB the interplay between the ongoing initiatives and also to clarify the timelines of the different work streams that is important to know and to inform parties before we are then deciding and considering a decision based on the additional information at the next meeting of the party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU, and I'm sure that delegates will be very interested in your advice about the very large contribution that the European Union is making to this important issue. Before I give the floor to Saudi Arabia, I just want to note that the Secretariat has also prepared an information document, which is inf.4, which actually contains the decision 9656 taken by the Executive Committee of the Multilateral Fund at its last meeting on options for a funding modality to support a limited number of pilot projects to enhance regional atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances. So that is another funding stream for delegates to consider. I now give the floor to Saudi Arabia.
أهلا وسهلا بالجميع وبسعادة الرئيسة المساعدة.
Hello to everyone, and we wish to thank Madam Co-Chair for all the preliminary work that was done in order to achieve the atmospheric monitoring of substances that come under the Montreal Protocol. We wish also to thank all those who contributed to this preliminary study, which will certainly have a major impact on our work in the future. Saudi Arabia insists on the importance to ensure that the monitoring of substances listed in the Montreal Protocol be based on voluntary action and escape any attempt, but at the same time to make sure that no attempts be made in order to escape the monitoring, and transparency and credibility will be extremely strong, which will make it possible for the countries to respect their sovereign decisions while maintaining their independence and specificity of the countries involved. Thank you for having given me the floor.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, for your observations. I now turn to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you to the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee for their work and the comprehensive presentation on this important matter. The UK remains committed to enhancing global atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances, and we are really encouraged by the progress made in this area, including the allocation of $400,000 at the 36th meeting of the parties, the EU-funded project, and the ongoing work at the Executive Committee on the development of a funding modality. Given the range of initiatives currently underway, we note the importance of having clarity regarding the scope and objectives of each initiative. This point has already somewhat been flagged by the distinguished delegate from Canada and addressed by the distinguished delegate from the EU, but we would like to emphasize that greater clarification will provide assurance that initiatives are aligned, collaborative, and avoid duplication of work. Furthermore, as highlighted in the presentation from the Advisory Committee, the UK also wishes to re-emphasize the critical role of equipment calibration. The calibration of monitoring equipment is essential in ensuring the accuracy, consistency, and comparability of atmospheric measurements across different sites and over time. Without regular calibration, data integrity may be compromised. We therefore urge parties to explicitly consider the long-term funding and sustainability of calibration efforts in addition to identification and development of new monitoring sites. In this context, the UK would welcome the establishment of an informal group to explore potential next steps on this very important matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I still have two parties on my list, which is, three now, Australia, United States of America, and Canada. So I turn the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We note with appreciation the updates provided by the Secretariat in relation to the work on atmospheric monitoring, both in the issues and for discussion document and in the oral report just provided, and also the presentation from Dr. Ravi Shankar. We look forward to receiving the final report of the EU project being implemented in conjunction with the Ozone Secretariat at MOP37, as it should include some valuable insights to inform further work being undertaken both inside this forum and outside. We also appreciate the expeditious work of the ExCom in moving forward with the direction provided by parties last year under Decision 96/56 on undertaking on some pilot projects for regional atmospheric monitoring regarding controlled substances. We understand the Chair of the ExCom will provide an update to the high-level segment at the 37th MOP, but given the importance of this work and that the ExCom was requested to report to the MOP on the work carried out to develop the funding modality for its consideration, we would really join with the previous interventions in wanting to, I guess, having an opportunity to understand the progress made and also the intersections and overlaps between the work that is ongoing across these work streams. We acknowledge that there's a lot going on in this space, and we really think it's important to have those ongoing discussions in an informal group, if at all possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Australia, for those observations. United States.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Just to build on what I said before, I think what we're seeing here is it's some really great work that's being done, and I think it's science at its very best that we do here in the Montreal Protocol. So we are very appreciative of the work of the advisory committee as well as the steering committee, as I said before, the Ozone Secretariat, and helping to convene and coordinate and report back. Just to say, I think this has all been incredibly helpful. I'd specifically mention what our colleagues from the EU just reported on as well. I think the pilot project has also been directly beneficial, but also I think in drawing lessons learned from it, as well as the additional money that they are providing. So we are appreciative of that. We have a lot of different aspects of this, I think, that are coming together to better inform parties of some important underlying science from which we can then be informed in further decision making. I did just want to emphasize a couple of things. I think one, others have indicated support for an informal group here. I think we were going to suggest the same thing. I think it is useful because I think there's some complexity here of the different things happening in sort of these different work streams, as well as specifically where some of the financing is coming from. So we think that would be quite helpful. I think quite noteworthy as well is the work being carried out in the discussion that we just had at the last meeting of the Executive Committee of the Multilateral Fund. I think all these efforts can work together and in parallel towards a good outcome for us. And I think in an informal group, it's an opportunity for us to come together, exchange views, and share information. And I think that'll be really helpful because I think there is some complexity here. I do just want to recall the decision that we took last year, in particular, is calling on us to organize activities for the specific purpose of evaluating suitability of potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances. And so we would very much view what we are doing in that specific context. And I would also note, I think it's important, and again, we can take this up in the informal group. I think it's thinking about, we have sort of a short-term mission here as we assess sites and figure out where there are gaps, where there are opportunities to try to fill some of those gaps. At the same time, we will need to think about the long-term sustainability of the efforts we undertake. I don't think it's helpful to have a short-term solution that that doesn't allow us to find monitoring sites that will have the technical competence to undertake these measurements, which are very demanding technically. But to the points that were raised a few minutes ago, it's also the engagement with existing institutions and capacity that can help ensure this longer-term sustainability and that longer-term success that we would like to see. And then finally, just to note, I think this is very helpful. I think we would just say, as a general matter, we'd encourage, I think the discussion we're having here is good. We look forward to it. As a general matter, we'd encourage all parties to consider establishing stations of your own. Any party can do that, irrespective of the discussion that we have here. And I think, you know, a lot of the science capacity, the experts that we hear from here, both on these steering and advisory committees, but in the SAP, there is a fair amount of capacity that is available from those scientists who can help for countries who may want to take on such initiatives on their own. So we would just note that, and also to say, the report out here, very helpful. We know we're going to get a lot more information at the MOP as well. So listen, an informal group here to have a good exchange, I think will be helpful, knowing that we have a lot more information coming to us at the MOP. So we'll look forward to that engagement there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. I turn to Canada. Canada is the last party on my list.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Well, similarly to other delegates, we'd like to thank the Secretariat and the representative of the Advisory Committee of the GTF for their updates on the actions taken since MOP 36 pursuant to Decision 36/1. We also want to thank the European Union for the work that has already been undertaken under the current pilot projects, and also we're appreciative of the fact that the results of this work are being shared with the Montreal Protocol community, and as well for the additional and very substantive new contribution that they just announced at this meeting. We also want to welcome the funding modality to support pilot projects on atmospheric monitoring that was agreed at the 96th meeting of the Executive Committee. We believe that responded satisfactorily to the requests from the parties in paragraph 4 of Decision 36/1. We foresee that in the future, the MLF would become a main source of financing for the establishment and operation of new stations in Article 5 countries that would be dedicated to atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances because it can provide long-term project management, financial and stable commitments to ensure the build-up and the long-term operations of such stations. However, as has been pointed out by the UK, the US, and others, we now have 3 funding streams for supporting this work. The Montreal Protocol Trust Fund, which is a relatively small contribution. The EU has announced a new contribution, and the MLF. So it's going to be important to understand how these streams of work will complement each other. The specific activities that will be funded by each one, and having an overall work plan and budget for moving forward with this work. Now, we suspect that we're not going to have that at this meeting because from what we understand, the Advisory Committee is just getting started, and we see that the Advisory Committee and the Ozone Secretariat are already at the center of this, and the committee needs to meet to figure out, okay, what's a path forward, and perhaps think about how these various sources of money could potentially be used. But, you know, it seems that this will also need to involve at least the European Union and the MLF Secretariat in some way, given where the other sources of funding would be coming from. Before we have an idea of what this work plan could be, I'm not really sure, you know, how much of a substantive discussion we could have at this meeting. We think, yeah, it's going to be useful to have set up an informal group, and we'll see where we go from there. But I think we'll probably be in a better situation at the MOP if we get this kind of information to be able to see how the work is moving forward and what is required from the parties to provide more further support to the Advisory Committee for the work that it intends to do. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Canada. I do have 1 or 2 minutes available for the observer if you would like to make a very brief statement. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to take the floor. Today, I am speaking on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. We are an international environmental nonprofit organization with a mission to safeguard the living beings on Earth and the natural systems on which all life depends. NRDC was born in the United States, and we have been observers at the Montreal Protocol meetings since the treaty's inception. We are extremely proud of the success of this treaty and the outstanding contributions of our country, the United States, to its success. However, as numerous parties have just noted, the protocol does not operate in a vacuum, and its success depends on multiple external institutions. US institutions like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, provide critical scientific capacities such as the atmospheric measurements, monitoring, and chemical analyses done through NOAA's Global Monitoring Laboratory and NASA's support for the A-Gauge network. These institutions are an integral part of the treaty's scientific engine, including our eyes on the sky, which is our ability to measure controlled substances in the atmosphere with accuracy, precision, and over long periods of time. And we need to keep this engine going. That is how we discovered the threat to the ozone layer in the first place. And continued monitoring capacity is essential for our understanding of evolving dangers, effective remedies, and for judging the success of the protocol. For example, without this monitoring network, the excess CFC-11 production in the previous decade could have remained undetected. At a minimum, it would have been extremely difficult to localize.
Excuse me, you have 1 more minute, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And it would have threatened the recovery of the ozone layer and accelerated the climate warming. A similar story is now unfolding with HFC 23. And despite these successes, the network is incomplete, and the parties recognize that, and now are taking steps to bolster the network, and NRDC strongly supports these efforts. But the main reason we have taken the floor today is to say that our eyes on the sky today are at serious risk. NRDC is deeply concerned about drastic budget and personnel cut proposals that could eliminate essential features of the NOAA and NASA Earth Science programs, in addition to the US Environmental Protection Agency. In the United States, however, Congress has the last word on funding, and it has rejected these kinds of deep cuts to scientific and environmental programs in the past. We sincerely hope that these essential programs are maintained. We remind all parties that although the US's contributions to science have been and still are indispensable, it is precarious to over-rely on one country for the technical underpinnings of the Montreal Protocol. Once again, we are very proud of the US's contributions and very much wish for them to continue. But other countries need to maintain and increase their contributions to the scientific data collection on which these efforts depend, both internationally and within their own borders.
Thank you very much, NRDC. Your time is up. Okay, I see that one more party wishes to take the floor. I would really like to close and make a proposal on the way forward. Norway, can I ask you to be brief?
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. I was just listening carefully to the previous intervention, and so I understand that there is maybe some budget restriction that might affect the work of NOAA and NASA, and we were just wondering whether this could have some potential impact in the work of the SAP, because I guess they are relying quite a lot on those activities. So perhaps if we could just allow a quick reflection from the SAP, if possible, on what is currently done through NOAA and NASA, and how this potential budget restriction could affect our global capacity and ability to effectively monitor the atmospheric concentration of the substances controlled under the Montreal Protocol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norway. I think that leads into how I was going to suggest a way forward, which was that we propose an informal group. I noticed that many countries who have taken the floor, or which had taken the floor, I'm sorry, had proposed an informal group, and perhaps those additional questions and observations might be able to be taken up in that group. I suggest probably that group would only have one meeting, and we will try and schedule it a little later in the week. If there's no objection to that way forward, And I don't see any objection being made. We will proceed in that manner. So thank you very much, delegations. Thank you very much to the Secretariat and to our experts for their good advice on this issue. So we will just adjourn consideration of this issue. We're not closing this issue, and we'll come back to it later in the week. We are coming up to 5:45 p.m. and I would like to go back to agenda item 4A, which is related to life cycle refrigerant management. As I indicated before, CRP4 has been posted on the Ozone Secretariat website. Before delegations seek and request a contact group, I would like to indicate that that is in our proposed way forward. So please, no need to intervene suggesting a contact group if you wish to respond to the proposal from Cuba. So I would like to turn to Cuba now to briefly introduce the CRP. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, distinguidos delegados.
Thank you. Dear delegates, colleagues, allow me to briefly present the document of a draft decision for development studies and strategies to find medium and long-term solutions to the significant accumulation of inventories of refrigerant gases nearing the end of their life cycles in Article 5 countries. This sets out the progress made under the Montreal Protocol in order to protect the ozone layer and highlights persistent challenges related to the accumulation and management of refrigerant gases with high global warming potential. I'd like to highlight concern with increasing use of these gases, which affects technological and economic capacities of various countries for their adequate recycling or destruction. The proposal strives that the next meeting of the parties, through TEEP, carries out an analysis of the capacities of countries in order to manage and destroy these gases, and to estimate the costs necessary in order to strengthen capacities in countries of Article 5. It also urges technical, financial, international cooperation in order to move forwards towards management which is environmentally reasonable of these substances. We invite all those present to consider this document as a key step forward in strengthening the global response to this environmental and climate challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cuba, for introducing the CRP. As I indicated before, I would like to propose a contact group to consider the CRP. There were many comments already made by delegations when this issue was more generally discussed earlier in the day, or was it yesterday? It was today, it was this morning. So I would urge countries to keep their comments brief. Chile, you have the floor.
Muy breve, señora copresidenta.
Very briefly, Co-Chair, just to say that we'd like to co-sponsor this document.
Very brief. Thank you. Thank you, Chile. I'm sure Cuba will be grateful for your support. Are there any other delegations wishing to provide brief responses? We do have a few minutes available. Thank you very much, delegations. I have one delegate seeking the floor. That's the Dominican Republic. You have the floor.
Sí, buenas.
Thank you very much. We would also like to co-sponsor this document as proposed by Cuba. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominican Republic. US, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. And while we appreciate that you drew our attention to this, because we were very engaged in listening to and being a part of the last discussion, we are only just digesting this draft decision. And I know you are interested in setting up a contact group, but we probably would need some time to digest this and perhaps get our thoughts around it. But a few just maybe brief initial reactions as the framing of this to us seems somewhat odd, because this is not a compliance obligation. LRM is not a compliance obligation. So for us, we think the framing here might be something we want to think about. We find that to be a bit odd, as well as some of the differentiation within this. I mean, for us, this is requesting information from parties, all parties, so the framing there also seems a little bit off for us. So we would like to reflect on this a bit more, but our initial reaction is that for us at least, there may be some interesting topics here that we could certainly discuss, but we would want to be careful that it is framed in a way in which it is clear this is not a compliance obligation.
Thank you very much, United States, for taking the time to briefly review it in light of the short time since it was posted. Are there any other delegations wishing to take the floor? I don't see any wishing to take the floors. Is there any objection to the proposed way forward, which is to establish a contact group to further discuss this CRP? I don't see any objections with that way forward. So thank you very much, delegations and colleagues. So we will be establishing a contact group to look at this particular issue. Our conveners, our very kind colleagues who have agreed to be conveners for this contact group are Maureen Godfrey from France and Sergio Marino from Mexico. So thank you very much for your assistance with this. We propose this contact group meet perhaps for the first time, well, it will be for the first time at 6:15 tonight. That will hopefully allow a little bit of time for delegations to grab some food and some sustenance. We're also proposing, I think that, and I've lost track of what was going to be tomorrow morning. We were going to suggest that the contact group on the terms of reference for the replenishment study meet tomorrow morning at 8:30. Both of these meetings will be in room CR3. So, are there any messages from the Secretariat? So thank you very much. We're going to call an early finish to our work this evening. Thank you very much for all your hard work. Bon appetit and enjoy the 2 contact groups homework that we have set for you. Thank you and good evening.